we should discuss authentication. At the moment for our projects here, anyone who has this URL has full permission and access to modify, change, delete, archive everything related to this project. Now, of course, in real-life projects, in 100% of the cases, that is not what you want. You need some kind of authentication layer that exclusively limits access to a team. So I want to demonstrate this in 2 steps. I'm going to begin by creating a fresh project. So we'll say Laravel new auth example, and we'll whip up a brand new Laravel 5.7 application from scratch. Okay, let's go in there, open this up in Sublime, and we have our fresh project here. Okay, finally, I'm going to boot up a server. Here we go, the familiar splash page. Now, take a look at this. I'm going to run PHP Artisan, and you'll see under the make namespace, there is a command here called make auth. Scaffold basic login and registration views and routes. This is really neat. You're going to like this. PHP Artisan make auth, and this will do a number of things. But first, if I switch back and give it a refresh, you now have a full registration and authentication system ready to go. Let's try it out. Now at the moment, I can't quite register because we haven't migrated our database. So if I were to say foo and then foo@example.com, we'll use that. Thank you, Safari. And if we run it, yeah, it is going to fail, but only because we haven't yet set up the database credentials for this project. So let's do that very quickly. In my .env file, I'm going to show you a different way. Yes, of course, we can use MySQL, but if I go into config/database, there's actually a number of connections or drivers that we can use. You can see SQLite, MySQL, Postgres, SQL Server. Why don't we just use a simple file-based database using SQLite? All right, just as a demonstration. So my connection is going to be SQLite, and you'll see here the things it will need is a path to the database, and that's just going to be a file. You can see here, if we don't provide one, it's going to look in the database directory for a file called database.sqlite. And you know what? That's fine with me. So let's remove that, and we should be all set to go. Let's create that file, database.sqlite. All right, and now I'm going to migrate our database. PHP Artisan migrate. There we go. Okay, so now we have a file-based database. And in fact, I think you could take this further than most people even accept. For lots of small projects in production, this would be entirely fine. It's also useful for testing purposes. Okay, so I will close out my server and boot it up again. And let's give it another try. joe@example.com, those are fine, and register. And there we go. So with that single artisan command, we've registered a new user and we have signed them in. Let's take a look. PHP Artisan Tinker. And let's grab all users from the database, and we do have that new Joe user. So we should now be able to log out and sign in again. joe@example.com, and we're back. As easy as that. So cool. So here are some things to be aware of. Within your routes/web file, when you ran that command, among other things, it added the authentication routes. Now, it does disguise the routes a little bit, but you can hunt them down in 2 ways. One, of course, you can say PHP Artisan route list, and if I zoom out a touch, here are all of the new routes that have been added. But if you want, you can also go into the router class, and there should be an auth method, and here is where they are defined as well. Now notice in all of these cases, they are deferring to an auth controller namespace. Let's take a look at that. HTTP controller, and this was added as well when you ran that artisan command. So take a look at this. Let's go to Safari, log out, register. Okay, here is the controller that is responsible for this. So if you take a look, we can specify where to redirect once a user has been registered. Here is the validator that will fire. And here is how we will create the new user. So imagine that in your migration, as part of your new project, you decide to use the term username instead of name. Okay, no problem there. Just make sure that in your register controller, you update this accordingly, and you have full control over that. Now, the same is going to be true for everything else, such as authenticating a user, or resetting a password, or verifying an email address. Now take a look at this. If we go back to our routes file, you can see when the user visits the /home URI, we're going to load a home controller at index. This is sort of like an example dashboard for you. You can remove it, configure it, whatever you want. If we go to home controller, you'll see within the constructor, there is a new section here called middleware. So middleware off. So we can basically gather from that, all right, well, you need to be authenticated to access any of these actions. But middleware is another one of those core concepts that might be a little scary at first until you learn it. So now that you understand the basic steps for adding authentication to an application, in the next lesson, we need to review a new core concept, middleware.